Kairete. I'm Dr. Seamus MacDonald, and this is the second in our series looking at the New Testament, in particular looking at the Gospel of John, in which I work through the Greek text and provide a bit of a running commentary in English on the Greek text. Let's get into today's reading. Kai haute stin he marturia to Ioannu, hote apestilan ho Judaioi ex Jerusalemon, Kyreis kai Levitas, hina erotesos in avton, su tis I. And so we've had the prologue, verses 1 to 18, and now really the gospel itself begins. Kai is linking and connecting a whole number of things, but here it's just introducing and connecting the first part of John's gospel after the prologue. The narrative begins properly. Haute stin. This is, and the haute here is looking forward, it's looking down, it's cataphoric. I'm going to use some technical language and some kind of everyday common explanations. This is the marturia, the testimony, the witness to Ioannu, of John. Talking about John the Baptist here, who of course was introduced in the prologue. And marturia, of course, is an important theme within John's gospel. You see that played out through the gospel itself. Hote is when apestelan ho Judaioi, when ho Judaio apestelen estin from the verb apostello, send. So here it's the aoristos. You can tell by the particularly the change of stem here, and then also, so the alpha is telling us that this is in the aorist, and then we have an augment for the indicative. The other important thing here to talk about a little bit is hoi Judaioi. This term is a little bit difficult to wrestle within John's gospel. You could translate it into English as the Jews or the Judeans, but very often the way John is using it, he's talking about the leadership of the Jewish people at the time. So it's really often referring to the Jews in power and authority centered in Jerusalem. And so here it's those Jews who are sending ex Jerusalemon, from Jerusalem, hiereis kai Levitas, priests and Levites. Priests and even more so Levites do not appear that often in the New Testament, especially Levites. The priests are a broader class, and Levites are a kind of a lesser class even than priests, because Levites are not involved in direct temple worship, but they have various functions associated with the temple. Hina erotesosin auton, so that they might ask him. Hina here introducing a purpose clause, the classic use of hina. Erotesosin then is hypotaktike, subjunctive. It is erotesosin. That is a aorist subjunctive. How do you know? Because of the sigma. Remember, there's no future subjunctive, and so the only options here are either it's a present, well, there are a couple of other options, but our main two options, is it present or is it aorist? It's aoristos, because of the sigma and the lengthening of the eta. So that they might ask him, su tis I, you, who are you? And so the su here, I think I would say, is fronted, it's brought to the front for emphasis. You, who are you? Kai homologesen, kai uk ernesato, kai homologesen, hoti ego uki miho Christos, ke erotesen auton tiun su Elias I, ke legi uki mi, ho prophetes isu, ke apokrythe u. And so here we, in verse 20, homologesen uk ernesato ke homologesen. We have this positive, negative, positive, triple kind of affirmation about what John testifies. And this language is kind of pointing towards this testimony courtroom language. He confessed and did not deny, and confessed, that is admitted, that is, and then we have the content of that with the hoti clause. Ego, again, the presence of ego is emphatic. Ego uki mi, I am not ho Christos, the Christ, the Messiah. Ke erotesen auton, and they asked. Here it's just a straight aoristos. Tiun su Elias I. And there's a number of textual variants for this part of the verse. This is probably the best option. Tiun What then? Su, again, su here is emphatic and fronted. You are Elias, that's Elijah. Ke legi, and he says, ukimi. And so notice that the responses become more brief here as the dialogue goes on. And there's no introduction for the next question. Ho prophetes isu, are you the prophetes, the prophet? That is the well-known prophet, the one that they are expecting. Probably a reference to Deuteronomy and the prophet like Moses. Ke epikrite, apokrinomai, standard verb for answering. Here it is the theta in the middle. This is quite common as well. And he answered, u. That's all you need for a negative response. U, no. Ipan un auto, tisi, hina apokrisin domen tois pempsas sin gemas. Ti legis periseo tu. Fp, ego phone boontos inte eremo. Evthunate ten hodon kuriu, kathos ipen Esaias ho prophetes. Ipen up the top here, this is a not uncommon alternative for the aoristos, the aorist, to have instead of ipon with an omicron, we get the alpha. It's a feature of Koine, the alpha that's common in other aorist forms creeps into this aorist as well. They said then to him, tis I, who are you? Hina. The hina here is a bit more hard to explain. It's easier to understand than to stick a grammatical label on. But in essence, they're saying, tell us so that. Tell us so that domen, here's our subjunctive, domen apokrisin, that we might give an answer. Apokrisin related to apokrinomai that we just had. This is the noun form, that we might give an answer. Domen, how do I work out what aspect and tense that is? It doesn't have any reduplication. That tells me that it is an aoristos. It's an aorist subjunctive. The omega here is lengthened because of the subjunctive. That we might give an answer tois pempsasin gemas, to those that sent us. This is a metoche participle. It is aoristos, aorist. It is dotike, dative, agreeing with tois. To those that sent us, that is the leadership back in Jerusalem. Ti legis periseo tu, what do you say about yourself, concerning yourself? Efe is another speech word, often used for direct quotation. Ego phone boontos inter eremo. Here we have a quotation drawn from Isaiah in the LXX, Isaiah chapter 40. And this parallels the introduction of John the Baptist in the Synoptic Gospels. I am, again, ego fronted and emphatic. I am a voice of one. So boontos is a metoche participle. Boao is the verb, alpha contract. The alpha has merged with the ending here, contracted, and so a and omicron makes the or. The voice of one crying, calling out, shouting, inter eremo, in the wilderness. What does that voice say? That's what this says. Evthunate ten hodon kuriu, make straight, make evthus, the way of the Lord. The Synoptic Gospels have a slightly different verb for this, hetoimasete, prepare. Kathos ipen, just as said, Esaias, Isaiah the prophet. So here we have a quotation formula, but it comes after our quotation, not before. Partly because this is quoting John in the context of the conversation, and I suspect that this is John the writer making the comment rather than John the Baptist. Ke apistalmenoi esan ekton phariseon, ke erotesan auton ke ipen auto, tiun baptizdeis isu uk I ho Christos, ude Elias, ude ho prophetes. Ke apistalmenoi, this is a perfect participle. The way we can tell this, a couple of things tip you off. Firstly, the accent on menoi does not go past the men part of a middle perfect participle, because there is no connecting vowel here. So even though this counts as short, the accent cannot go back to here, and so that tells me, oh, this is a middle perfect participle. We have reduplication here. That's what the e is doing here. It can't be an augment, because participles do not have augments. And so this is how we reduplicate for the verb apostello. It's working here in connection with apostellmenoi esan. They were sent, or they have been sent. They have been sent, but the question is, who has been sent? Ekton Pharisean, from the Pharisees or of the Pharisees. Either we are to interpret about the whole group from before, that is the priests and the Levites. That seems relatively unlikely given the context. Or it says that some others, tines apostellmenoi esan, some were sent or have been sent from the Pharisees. That is a second group. I think that makes better sense in context because they go on to ask another question here, which works with the previous questions, but again, it's a slightly different take. Erotes and auton, they asked him, and ipen auto, and they said to him, so a little bit of redundancy here, but doubling up again, aoristos with the alpha. Tiun baptistes, this T here is why. Why do you baptize? Of course, much discussion about what baptizo means. Seems to me relatively clear that within New Testament texts, baptizo primarily refers first to immersion in water. What exactly that means in any particular context may differ, but immersing something in water is the starting point for other metaphorical uses. John the Baptist's practice definitely seems to be immersing people in water in the Jordan River. Why then do you baptize? If suuk ho Christos, good practice here for early stage learners, or a as if, and then or a as you are. If you are not the Christos, the Messiah, ude is functionally equivalent to kai u and not. Ude is preferred, generally speaking. Nor Elias, you're also not Elijah. Ude ho prophetes, nor the prophet. Apikrithe autois ho Ioannos legon, ego baptizdo in hydati, mesos humon hesteken hon hymes uk oidate, ho opissomu erkomenos, hu uk imi axios hinaluso autu ton himanta tu hypedematos. Apekrithe legon. Again, this is quite a common feature of New Testament Greek to have a verb of reply or response, apekrithe, paired with a participle, legon, of speech. And so he answered saying. Sometimes in translation it's impossible to bring that through. In fact, it's not worth bringing through. It's a feature of the Greek that other languages may not wish to replicate. But legon, in a way, just introduces the direct speech. Ego baptizdo. And again, I would say the ego here is fronted. It's emphatic because of the contrast we're about to have with mesos humon. I baptize in hydati. This is standard feature of Koine Greek, particularly New Testament, that n introduces with a dotike, a dative, the means or the instrument by which something is done. I baptize with water, in water. In is quite appropriate because it's water, there's an immersion going on, but you'll find in other contexts, other things are going on where it's just an instrumental use of n. Mesos humon, in the middle of you, mesos humon, hesteken stands. Hesteken estin parkimenos, that is, it's a perfect. And there's a bit of debate about the perfect. If you've seen some of my other stuff, you'll know some of my views. But really with the verb histemi, most often hesteken just means is standing, implying a prior act of standing up. And so here I would not overemphasize the aspect here. In the middle of you stands, is present, is literally standing. Hon, this is the relative, and because it's relative because it's the object of idate, or the complement. One, you could supply a one. In the middle of you stands one whom, humes uk idate, you don't know. Goes on to describe this figure. Ho opissomu erkomenos. This ho looks forward to erkomenos, the one coming opissomu. Opisso is normally a spatial reference, after me. It's usually interpreted in this verse in a temporal sense, that is, behind or after me in time. But some have argued that opiso here does kind of have a spatial sense in the sense of to follow after. That is, Jesus in some sense is a disciple or a follower of John. That doesn't seem to be entirely what's going on based on the New Testament evidence. But he does emerge from John's broader circles, doesn't he? Nonetheless, it's within the realm of opisomu, behind me, after me, to have a temporal kind of reference, especially in the way that John is building a kind of a contrast and a paradox. Who is the relative genike, the genitive, whose, uk imi axios. And I think really that who is kind of looking forward to this statement a little bit. But also axios can take a genike, and that, of whom I am not worthy. And so I think it's doing a double duty. Probably that second sense is more what's going on with the who. Of whom I am not worthy, I am not equal. But that worthiness is explained with the hina clause. So hina here is what people would call ep-exegetical. It's explaining in what respect, or it's filling out in what respect is John uk axios, not worthy. In classical Greek, we might have an infinitive to expand that clause, but in Kune, and especially in John's Gospel, you often find hina bleeding into other categories. That I should luso, that I should untie, and that is aorestos, that's why the sickness there. Untie ton himanta to hypodematos. The hypodema is footwear, shoe or sandal. And so of the shoe or sandal, and then ton himanta, kind of a little bit related to himation, the binding, that is the strap. Taufta in Bethania egeneto perantu Jordano, hopu en ho Ioannes baptizdon. Taufta, these things, egeneto, happened, aoristos. These things happened in Bethania, in Bethany. Peran is what people call an improper preposition. And what they mean by that is an improper preposition is one that cannot be normally prefixed to a verb. Very often they take the genike, the genitive, beyond the Jordan, on the other side of the Jordan. Hopu, I would call hopu the relative version of pu, where. And so we have pu, where, and then it's possible to use pu as an indirect question word as well, but hopu is the relative version of where John was baptizing. This is a good example of the fact that even though Greek in general, including Greek in the Kune period, prefers not to use compound or periphrastic tenses, I would say that this is an example where we have the imperfect paratatikos and was, and then we have a present participle, a progressive or imperfective participle, where John was and baptizing. Instead of using a simple imperfect, which would have done the job, hopu ho Johannes e baptizden. Not to criticize the Greek of the New Testament, but simply to observe that there are some things that have shifted in the language from Attic and earlier Greek, and those are features that if you're coming from that background, you need to wrestle with a little bit and say, Greek here is different. And sometimes that's true of the New Testament more broadly, sometimes that's true of John in particular. Te epaurion blepi ton Iesun erchomenon prosauton kai legi, ide ho amnos tu theu, ho eron ten hamartian tu cosmum, hutos estin hyper hu ego ipon, opisso mu erketai aner hos emprosten mu gegonen, hoti protos muen. Te epaurion. Aurion by itself can mean tomorrow, but in John and in the New Testament, there tends to be a preference to use epaurion, and here it's made into a noun phrase, really with a te epaurion hemera, the following day, the next day, the tomorrow. But if I was translating, I would just say on the next day. Blepi, who's the subject of blepi? It's Ioannes. John sees, and we've moved into the present tense here. And so in translation, you might shift this back to the past. It's some kind of historical present in the narrative. He sees, ton Iesun sees Jesus, erkomenon, coming, prosaton, towards him. Kailegi and says, ide. Most students are probably more familiar with idu, behold, look. Ide is similar and is also building up an imperative stem, but it's fossilized. It's saying something like, here is. So again, it's drawing attention, it's deictic, it's saying, look, pay attention. Here is ho amnos tu theu. That probably explains why this is in the nominative case. Ho amnos, it's an exclamation. Behold, see, here is the amnos, the lamb, tu theu, of God. The second ho then tells me, oh, I've got more information to tell you about ho amnos. The one that airon, metoche, participle, to take away, remove, or destroy. Here I do think remove or take away is probably the best way to understand the semantics of this verb in this context. Who takes away ten hamartian, the sin as a holistic whole or as a concept, the sin to cosmo, of the world, of the universe, of everything. Hutos estin. So this hutos is emphatic. This is the one. As we might say in more contemporary English, this is the guy, huper hu, about whom ego ipon, I said. This is the guy I was telling you about. This is the guy about whom I said. And so then we get a rephrasing of his earlier statement. Opisso mu erketai. Now we don't have a participle, but the indicative verb, erketai. After me comes an aner, a man. Hos, relative, hos, who, emprostenmu, gegonen. Who, gegonen is the parakimenos, the perfect from gignomai, who has come to be. That's an over translation of gegonen to bring out its kind of meaning. And really he's just using it here to provide a type of contrast to state that Jesus, even though he comes alpisso autu, after him, he is emprostenmu, he is before me. Hoti protosmu en, because he was, again, this is a little bit difficult to unravel. Protos normally means first. He was first, and he was first mu. What's the mu doing here? I would say that the sense of protos here is actually comparative, and that explains why the mu is genike, genitive. He is because he was prior to me. And so there's a shift here between status and temporality. The relationship between John means that John comes first, Jesus comes after, and yet actually in another sense Jesus is prior to him, and so he's actually before him in status. And in a certain sense temporality, if we think back to the prologue. Kago uk eidin auton, al hinafanarothei to Israel, diatuto elton, ego in hydati baptizdon, ke marture sen Ioannos legon, hoti tetheame, to pneuba katabainon, hosperisteran ex uranu, ke emenen epauton. So John continuing to speak here. Kago is Crassus from kai ego, and I. Uk eiden. Eiden is the hypersuntelikos, the pluperfect of oida, to know, because oida is formed in the perfect and then in the pluperfect. The pluperfect is used for the imperfect, put it that way. That is, it's morphologically, its formation is pluperfect, but its usage is just imperfect. And I did not know him. It's the past version of oida, put it that way. Here almost in the sense of I did not know him, I did not recognize him, something like that. Al hina phanerothe, but in order, again purpose, here with a hypotaktike subjunctive, that he might be phaneros, he might be revealed, might be clear, might be made known to Israel, to Israel. Standard for names from the Hebrew to not be declined at the end, but to indicate their case. If there's an article, the article will tell you the case that you should understand. To Israel. Here then we get dia tuto. This dia tuto resumes and fills out this hina clause. That is, the hina clause is brought forward to tell you the purpose, and then dia tuto resumes what was prior. Because of this, that he might be revealed to Israel. Because of this, erthon ego, I came. Again, ego, emphatic, really emphatic in contrast because of the contrast going on between Johannes or Baptistes, kai ho Jesus. I came in hudati baptizon. Again, in hudati, I would say, has been dislocated to the left, moved forward in the phrase. I came in water baptizing, or with water. The contrast is not exactly apparent yet, but it's implying the baptism of John with water is to be contrasted with the baptism which Jesus does in the Spirit. Que emartures en Ioannes legon. So we're out of direct speech here. We can add in an end of quotation mark here. And John testified, so back to the marturia language, again with a metoche of speech. John testified saying, and so then the hoti introduces more speech. Te theame. This is from theomai, that is to see, to behold, to observe. We can tell that we are in the parakimenos, the perfect, because of the reduplication here, and there is no connecting theme vowel between the verb and its ending. So I have seen, or I have beheld, I have observed, I have witnessed. I wouldn't use the word witness in translation because of the way it's being used elsewhere here, but this idea of I have visually seen. And there's a number of perfects through this section emphasizing the resulting testimony and the ongoing state that John continues as a witness because of what he has seen and observed. To pneuma, the Spirit, katabainon, this is a metoche participle. It is eudeteron neuter because it's agreeing with to pneuma. I have seen the Spirit descending, hos peristeran, as a dove, ex uranu, from the sky, from heaven. There's a sense in which I think there's a question of in what sense does the Spirit come down like a dove? But in some of the Gospels that's brought out really that it's a visual. In what sense is it like a dove? It looks like a dove, has the form of a dove. Okay, emenen abavton, and remained upon him. Emenen again is aoristos, aorist. The stem change tells me that it's aorist. The augment because we're in the indicative, and so it's actually past. Kago uk ide in auton al hopemsos me baptizdin in hudati ekinos muipen e pronanides to pneuma katabenon ke menon apavton hutos estin ho baptizdon in pneumati hagio kago heoraka ke memartureka hoti hutos estin ho ekletos tu theu. So still John speaking here, another kego, kaigo, and I, uk iden avton. So really emphasizing the fact that I did not know him. Idin again, the supersyntelikos, the pluperfect of oida, but just used as a straight past. I did not know him. Al ho. And so here we have elision of the Allah. You can't have the alpha because the next word starts, well, you can, but the next word is a vowel, and the vowel, in a sense, swallows up the leading or the trailing alpha of the Allah. What's probably difficult for us is that the ho, if you read it with a rough breathing, it's a bit hard it's a bit hard for English speakers, I think, to replicate that. But keep in mind that by the Kune period, the rough breathings probably weren't pronounced, and so it would just be allopempsas. This is a metoche, it's aoristos, it is nominative, the one that sent me. And this kind of phrase is pretty common in John's Gospel to talk about the Father as the one that sent me. Hopemsos me. The one that sent me, baptizdein, is aparemphatos, infinitive. And here it really is, I would call it a purpose infinitive. That is, It's filling out the purpose for which he was sent. He was sent to baptize. There are other ways to do this. It can be done with an articular infinitive, that is with an article, but it shouldn't be a stumbling block for you. The one that sent me to baptize, in hudati, in water, almost want to stick in a conceptual comma here. Ekinos, that guy, that is, we're talking about God. Ekinos then is resumptive and emphatic. That guy said to me, moi ipen, epon, so now we get speech of God as reported to John. Epon an ides. F is epi. We've dropped the iota, and because of the rough breathing here, this is turned into phi. Upon whom, and then the an is making this more indefinite and triggering a subjunctive here. Upon whomever, ides from idon, upon whomever you see. So an expectation that you will see someone upon whom this does happen, but whoever that person is, that you see to pneuma katabenon, the spirit descending, again metoke, kai menon, also metoke, participle, and remaining upon him. This is almost redundant because of the epon. I would say it's maybe slightly emphatic, maybe kind of resumptive, and descending and staying on him. Hutos. Similar structure to this line here. Hutos is this one. This is the one ho baptizdon, the one that is the one baptizing. In pneumati hagio, in or by the Holy Spirit. And so why is it en? Partly because it's en hudati. Just as very literal baptism involves immersion in water, baptizing in or by the Spirit metaphorically draws upon the Spirit as liquid-like in whatever we understand Holy Spirit baptism to involve. That's probably a little more into theology than I want to go, but I think you can understand, the domain of water for baptism shapes the way baptism in pneumati hagio, in or by the Holy Spirit, is spoken about. And so then the final verse here, kago heoraka. Again, this is the perfect of horao. It has a kappa because we're in the active system. We have double reduplication here. Well, not double reduplication, but essentially we have reduplication and then augmentation, which is functioning like double reduplication, I would say. I have seen kai memartureka, and again a reduplication and a kappa marking the parakimenos, the perfect, and I have testified hoti hutos estin ho eklektos, that this one, that he, emphatic, is ho eklektos, the elect, the chosen one, to theu, of God. Let me say there's good manuscript evidence against this reading, and to read instead here ho huios to theu, the Son of God. That seems to accord more with John's overall message rather than ho eklektos, but either are possible. And for this series, I've just pulled off the Greek text that's available, and so I will comment on some textual issues as we go. Either way, ho eklektos to theu e ho huios to theu. And that's it for this first lecture. Thanks for joining me. Second lecture, my apologies. And hope you'll join me for more in the series as we work through John's Gospel and the Greek of this text.